There are moments in history when the voice of God breaks into the ordinary course of human life, shattering routine, moving nations, and marking eternity. It was in one of those moments that the voice came, not with thunder shaking mountains, but with the weight of a purpose that would resonate through the centuries. The sands of the East whispered the beginning of a covenant, a promise forged not in the palaces of kings, but in the heart of a man who dared to listen. The Creator looked upon the restless tide of humanity, scattered, anxious, hungry for meaning, and chose a vessel, not for his strength, nor for his wealth, nor for earthly power, but because his mercy delights in raising the humble and leading them on paths they could never walk on their own. He spoke with the serene authority of eternity. Leave what you know, forsake what you love, enter into what you cannot yet see. I will bless you. I will make your name a testimony, and through you, all the families of the earth will see my goodness. It was not merely a personal invitation. It was a declaration that the course of nations would change forever. That day, deep within Abram's spirit, a certainty was etched. What God blesses cannot be cursed. What he opens, no one can close. And what he establishes endures forever. Even before taking the first step, his heart could already say, I walk in the blessing that nothing and no one can break. The covenant spoken in that distant land was not a fragile agreement, subject to breaking with time. It was sealed by the one who set boundaries for the sea and who holds the stars in their place by his word. Yet within this promise also lay a warning. Those who rise up to curse, destroy, or oppose what God has blessed will taste the bitterness of his justice. It was not vengeance born of human anger, but the holy defense of the one who guards his people as the apple of his eye. The shadow of judgment rose alongside the light of hope, together tracing the silhouette of a story that would run from ancient deserts to the ends of time. Thus began the journey, not just that of a man named Abram, but of a promise that would touch every family, every nation, every generation. The steps taken in obedience that day left footprints on the very map of redemption. Even now, those who belong to the faith of Abraham walk under that same blessing, protected by the same hand, called to carry the same light. Today, we stand amid the living unfolding of that promise. The same God who spoke then still speaks, calling us to step out, to trust, to bless, and to believe that what he declares will not fail. The covenant has not grown old. It beats with the same strength because the God who made it does not change. The blessing God promised Abram was no simple gift nor reward for human merit. It was the outpouring of divine favor, the tangible manifestation of his eternal love and power. In that sacred moment, the blessing was sealed not by man nor human agreement, but by the unbreakable faithfulness of God, who is the source of all life, hope, and good. From the beginning, God's blessing reveals his nature. He not only created the universe with his mighty hands, but sustains every star in its course and guides human steps with infinite care. Within that unfathomable mystery lay the truth Abram had to understand. No blessing makes sense if its root is not God himself. Called to leave the security of his land, Abram had to recognize he could not walk alone. His strength did not lie in his descendants, possessions, or intellect, but in the God who spoke to him and promised a future. The blessing he would receive was a river flowing from that divine spring, reaching through his life to touch many. In our own lives, this truth remains intact. When we face droughts, losses, or uncertainty, remembering God as the source of all blessing is an anchor for the soul. It is not myth nor vain hope. It is the certainty experienced in intimacy with him. God's blessing is neither sold nor bought. It does not depend on our skills or human approval, but on his sovereign will and eternal love. The Bible shows us that divine blessing is always linked to God's faithfulness, not human perfection. Therefore, even in doubts and stumbles, God's favor remains firm. He is the God who lifts, restores, and renews. His blessing is an act of grace, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. Here lies true freedom. if blessing does not depend on our strength, we can live without fear of losing it, knowing it is secured by the promise of the Most High. Thus, now more than ever, we can declare confidently, I walk in the blessing that nothing and no one can break. Abram was the first pilgrim of that blessing. We are spiritual heirs who still live under its shadow. God's blessing is not a relic of the past, but a power acting today, able to change circumstances, heal wounds, and open closed doors. May this reality penetrate the depths of our being, so that facing each day and every challenge, we do so assured that the blessing that comes from God is no fleeting illusion, but the very manifestation of His faithful and eternal presence. After hearing the promise and feeling the weight of that divine call, Abram had to take a step that would transform not only his life, but the destiny of generations. Blessing is not a reward given without response. It is the fruit born from the covenant between God's word and man's obedience. The call to leave his land, kin, and his father's house was a command that defied human logic, comfort, and known security. Walking into the unknown requires faith, a faith that does not settle for belief alone, but translates into action, breaking with the past to embrace the future God has prepared. This act of obedience was prophetic. In his departure, Abram was not just moving physically. He declared his trust in the one who called and blessed him. The promised blessing was conditioned on this radical response. Because God honors total surrender, the willing heart yielded to His will. To obey is essentially to walk in God's will even when the path is unclear, even when the promise seems distant or the surrounding world is full of doubts. Obedience opens the door for blessing to flow, as it signals our alignment with the eternal purpose rather than temporary earthly plans. Abram's story reminds us that obedience is a place where judgment and grace meet. For those who follow God, blessing is sure. For those who oppose or stray, judgment acts as holy correction, a call to return. God does not desire His people to suffer, but to walk in abundant life. Obedience is the key that opens that door. Today, this truth resonates strongly in our own lives. How many times do we face decisions requiring us to leave security, break habits, or surrender comfort? The divine invitation remains. Step out, trust, and obey, not out of obligation, but out of love. Where there is love, obedience becomes joy and hope. Thus, the blessing that began with a covenant thousands of years ago remains active because every generation is called to live it in obedience. It is not enough to receive the promise. We must live it, testify to it, surrender ourselves with full trust in the God who does not change. Therefore, today we can affirm with conviction, blessing is not just a gift, but a living covenant cultivated in daily obedience, in the constant yes to God who calls, guides, and restores. Abram's path shows us that blessing begins when we respond to the call, when we leave behind the old to walk into the new, trusting that God sustains every step. As Abram's story unfolded, a spiritual law emerged that transcends time and space. The blessing God pours out upon His people is not a treasure to hoard selfishly, but a living source that flows toward all who choose to be channels of that divine favor. Within the eternal covenant, God made clear that those who bless His people will also be blessed, a truth embodying perfect justice and infinite mercy from the sovereign Lord over life and death. This principle echoes constantly in Scripture. The one who extends a helping hand, who supports and lifts God's children, finds themselves under the Most High's protection and grace. It is not a mere human exchange of favors or earthly alliances. It is a spiritual reality bearing the seal of divine faithfulness. To bless God's chosen people is not only an act of kindness, but a joining to God's eternal purpose. And those who join receive the blessing directly from heaven. Remember, Abram's blessing was not only personal but intended so that through him, all families of the earth would be blessed. Therefore, those who choose to bless God's children actively participate in that redemptive plan aimed at restoring the whole world. Blessing and being blessed are two sides of the same divine coin. This truth has profound implications today. In a world marked by division, indifference, and struggles for power, the call to bless becomes a revolutionary act. To bless fellow believers, to pray for them, support them in their struggles, and walk in unity with them is to open the door for God's grace to descend, not only upon them but upon ourselves. However, this blessing should not be seen as a simple deal or selfish interest. The divine blessing received when blessing God's people is a gift that transforms the heart, opens spiritual eyes, and strengthens faith. It is the tangible sign that we are in tune with God's will and part of His work on earth. Behind this beautiful reality also stands God's justice protecting His people. God promises to defend those who bless His children because He knows the struggles and battles His people face. Just as He curses those who rise to harm them, He extends His favor over those who become allies of His people. Imagine for a moment the solemnity of this promise. In a world full of conflict, betrayal, and pain, blessing becomes spiritual armor. It is not the protection of man, but the protective shadow of the Almighty covering those who choose to be friends and guardians of the faith. Thus, blessing becomes a dynamic, living covenant that protects, sustains, and builds. Those who understand it live with deep awareness that when they bless, they build an eternal legacy, a chain of grace transcending generations and borders. Therefore, today more than ever, we can decide to be bearers of blessing for others, knowing that God upholds us and will reward us abundantly. To bless His people is to bless with the blessing He Himself has poured out, and in that act of love, we find true life. Within the same covenant where God promised to bless Abram and his descendants, He revealed a profound and comforting truth. He is not only the giver of blessings, but also the relentless defender against those who seek to curse or destroy. The promise that those who curse you I will curse is not a mere warning, but the manifestation of a God who does not abandon His own, who stands as a holy defender amidst the invisible and visible battles of life. To imagine Abram's life in those days is to behold a world full of dangers, conflicts, and constant threats. But in the midst of that hostile scene, God assured him that a power greater than any enemy was present. No matter how great the opposition, how fierce the persecution, or how dark the path, His protector was there, and His justice would blaze against those who rose against Him. This promise was not only for Abram, but for all who walk under the shadow of the Most High today. We live in times when evil manifests in many forms: spiritual attacks, injustice, persecution, betrayal, and countless adversities. Yet, the eternal voice that spoke to Abram tells us that we are not alone nor defenseless. God is a shield around His children, an unbreakable wall. When the enemy lifts his hand to curse, He responds with His word, His power, and His justice. This is not human vengeance, but the holy judgment that protects God's purpose on earth. Often, this divine defense acts silently, behind the scenes, sustaining our lives even when we are unaware of the battles being fought. At times, His defense is revealed openly, breaking chains, nullifying plans, and forcing darkness to retreat. But this divine protection is also a call to trust and rest. We do not need to carry the heavy burden of revenge or live in constant fear. Our confidence is in the One who fights for us, who with perfect justice defends His chosen. This assurance transforms our hearts and grants us peace amidst the storm. Knowing God as our defender also encourages us to live with courage and hope. No power in this world can destroy what God has protected. Therefore, in uncertainty or attack, we can firmly declare, our defense is in the Lord. His protective shield invites us to move forward boldly, not retreat or fear, knowing the same God who promised to bless us also commits to defend us against all evil. This protection is not just for our safety, but so that blessing can freely flow through us without being stopped by evil or fear. Thus, the promise God made to Abram extends to us today. a God who not only blesses but also defends, who not only gives life but guards it zealously. The promise God made to Abram was not just for him, but had an expansive, transformative purpose. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. This phrase reveals a profound mystery. The blessing received is not a personal treasure to guard jealously, but a living river that flows and returns multiplied. In God's design, every person who receives blessing is called to be a channel through which his favor reaches others, becoming a bridge between heaven and earth. It is not an exclusive privilege, but a sacred responsibility. Every action, every word, every decision can be the means by which God's grace touches lives beyond what we see. Imagine for a moment the scope of this truth in your own life. What you do today, how you live, what you choose to share with others, has an impact that can touch families, communities, even nations. In Abram's story, that blessing flowed like a mighty river, and today it continues through those who respond to God's call. To be a channel of blessing means living consciously, knowing that our lives can transform realities. Every act of love, every gesture of forgiveness, every encouraging word is a seed God can use to raise others, to open doors where walls seem to stand, to bring hope to broken hearts. This call also invites intentionality in our relationships and how we influence our environment. We are not isolated islands, but part of a greater body where one's blessing strengthens all. God's blessing is not meant to be kept for oneself, but multiplied as it is shared. Often, this flow of blessing is not visible at first glance. Many times, what we sow in faith seems small, insignificant, or ignored. Yet, God is the one who makes the seed grow, who multiplies the effect of our obedience and surrender. What today seems just a gesture may tomorrow become hope for many. Remember that God's design is for each of his children to be a living channel of his love and grace, allowing his light to penetrate the darkest places and his peace to transform the deepest wounds. Understanding this invites us to live with purpose, faith, and certainty that we are part of a much larger story, a story transcending time and space. The blessing flowing through us can change whole lives. Abram's life shows us that blessing is not an end in itself, but a means to fulfill God's eternal purpose, that all families of the earth may know his love and salvation. When God made his covenant with Abram, he did not speak only to one man or bless a single isolated generation. His word crossed centuries with a power that transcends time, touching generations yet to come. At the heart of that covenant is the multigenerational promise. The blessing Abram received was not just for him, but for his descendants, for all who, through faith, join that spiritual inheritance, marking the story of redemption. This promise invites us to behold God's faithfulness not only in the present moment, but across humanity's long journey. From that first call, every step Abram took became a cornerstone upon which the destiny of peoples, families, and hearts would be built. Blessing does not exhaust itself in time, nor fade with death. It is transmitted, multiplied, rooted, and grows in every soul that chooses to walk by faith. The idea of a multigenerational promise challenges us to look beyond our own time and circumstance. It calls us to consider that our decisions and faith impact not only our present, but the legacy we leave to those who follow. It is a call to live with responsibility and vision, aware that we are part of a sacred chain connecting the ancient with the future. The book of Hebrews reminds us how Abraham believed against all hope and was called God's friend by his faith, Hebrews 11. That faith was not a single act, but a movement crossing generations, reaching today millions who, though not physical descendants, are heirs of that blessing through faith in Jesus Christ. Therefore, when we think of Abram's blessing, we must remember it is a living, dynamic, expansive blessing. It does not limit itself to a group or specific era, but manifests in every time and culture, touching lives, families, and nations repeatedly. The multigenerational promise also reveals God's patience and sovereignty. Blessing may delay full manifestation, may pass through seasons of waiting, testing, and pain, but it is never forgotten or annulled. God fulfills in His perfect time, and His faithfulness stands firm despite our doubts or failures. This perspective gives us hope to face present difficulties. When a world seems to grow darker, injustices rise, and younger generations face new challenges, we can trust the promise remains active, working silently to bring restoration and life. Moreover, the multigenerational promise invites us to be builders of spiritual legacy. Each generation is responsible to pass on faith, teach God's way, keep alive the torch God lit in Abram. It is a commitment transcending individual comfort and embracing the divine mission to bless all families of the earth. In daily life, this means our actions and choices affect not only our destiny, but also that of those who follow. Our testimony, faithfulness, and prayer can open paths of blessing for children, grandchildren, and generations to come. This concept also teaches us patience and perseverance. We do not always see immediate fruit of our faith, but we know God is working invisibly, preparing the ground for blessing to bloom in due time. Abram exemplifies this hope. Though he faced uncertainty, trials, and moments of doubt, he remained firm in God's promise. His life testifies that divine faithfulness never fails and blessing can overcome even human limitations. When we grasp that the promise is multigenerational, our perspective widens. We do not live for ourselves alone, but for the story God writes through us. Every act of faith, every sacrifice, every encouraging word is an eternal investment beyond time. In this reality, we find comfort and motivation. We know our lives connect to a greater purpose, part of a divine plan that neither evil nor death can stop. God's promise is a firm anchor amid storms, a beacon lighting the way for us and those who follow. May this knowledge inspire our faith and push us to live courageously, trust in God's faithfulness, and pass on the blessing with love, knowing we cultivate a legacy that lasts forever. As we conclude this journey through the promise God made to Abram, it is essential to understand that divine blessing is not static nor limited. It is expansive, dynamic, and capable of transforming everything in its path. From that initial call, the blessing has followed an unstoppable course, reaching not only Abram's physical descendants, but all who, by faith, join God's covenant, embracing His eternal purpose. The expansion of blessing reflects God's own nature, a God who is not satisfied with little, who does not limit His favor to a small group, but desires all families of the earth to know His love, justice, and salvation. God's blessing is a mighty river that cannot be contained, a fire that cannot be quenched, a light shining in the darkness to attract and transform. Throughout history, we have seen this blessing cross borders, cultures, and generations. From the promised land to the farthest corners of the world, God's promise has manifested in renewed lives, transformed communities, and nations experiencing the Almighty's grace. This expansion is also a call for us today to actively participate in this unstoppable flow of blessing. The blessing we receive is not to be hoarded or limited, but to be shared, to become multiplying agents carrying God's favor to places where darkness seems to prevail. Every word, every action, every gesture of love born from our faith can be a spark igniting the flame of blessing in others. We are called to be instruments through which God extends His mighty hand to reach those who do not yet know His mercy. However, expansion also involves responsibility. We cannot allow blessing to stagnate in comfort or selfishness. The same God who promised to bless Abram invites us to go out, walk by faith, and take blessing beyond our borders, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. Expansive blessing is a movement of life that touches homes, breaks chains, heals wounds, and builds bridges where there were walls. It is the manifestation of a living God acting today with power and tenderness, who does not abandon His people and continues to write the story of redemption. Understanding this reality calls us to open our hearts and hands to be channels of blessing, aware that in doing so, we participate in God's eternal purpose. Blessing that begins in a willing heart multiplies and becomes a force impacting entire communities and transforming destinies. Thus, the promise God made to Abram becomes tangible in our lives when we accept the call to expand that blessing, being bearers of hope, justice, and love in a world desperately needing them. Today, with the same faith Abram had when he left the known behind, we can declare, God's blessing knows no limits, no borders, and cannot be contained. It is an unstoppable force flowing through us, fulfilling God's divine dream to bless all families of the earth. May this truth transform how we live and think, and may we walk each day with the conviction that we are part of something far greater, an expansive blessing changing the world, a blessing only God can give and none can take away. When we gaze upon the vast horizon of the promise God made to Abram, we see more than an ancient story. We discover a living call that transcends time and echoes powerfully in our hearts today. The blessing that began in a remote corner of the world did not stop there. It became an eternal force, a river of grace that flows ceaselessly, touching lives, restoring hearts, and carving a legacy no storm can erase. This blessing is more than a gift. It is the manifestation of God's faithful love, the supreme act of His mercy and justice. It reminds us that the source of all good is in Him, that His favor is for those who choose to walk in obedience, and that those who bless His people participate in a divine covenant extending through generations. In the midst of trials, when the shadow of adversity seems to loom, we can trust that God is our defender, our impenetrable shield. His promise of protection guarantees that no evil will prevail against those who walk under His blessing. Moreover, we are called to be channels of that favor, transmitters of hope, justice, and love, carrying God's light wherever there is darkness. Let each one of us understand that we are not here by chance. We are part of a greater story, of a plan that transcends time and borders. Our lives are a legacy in the making, a foundational piece in fulfilling the multigenerational promise God sealed with Abram. Today, the blessing keeps flowing. It is not static or limited. It is expansive, dynamic, and powerful. It invites us to step out, to trust, to act with faith and courage, knowing we are bearers of a favor that transforms, builds, and never fades. And that is why I invite you to make this truth your own. I walk in the blessing that nothing and no one can break. May this phrase not be mere words, but a living covenant we declare with all our being. A covenant of faith, hope, and love that drives us to live purposefully, to bless others, and to be faithful witnesses of the unchanging God. The story continues in your hands. Will you answer the call? Will you be the one to carry forward the blessing for the generations to come? It is time to rise, to step out, to believe, because the God who blesses is the same one who defends, the one who calls is the one who guides, and the promise is for you, today, here, now.